What if the world's most famous playwright never actually wrote a single word? For centuries, William Shakespeare has been hailed as the greatest writer in the English language, the genius behind Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, and countless other masterpieces. But a provocative mystery has haunted scholars, historians, and literary detectives alike. Who really wrote Shakespeare's plays? Was it the man from Stratford-upon-Avon, or was Shakespeare just a name, a mask hiding the true author's identity? Welcome to Old Topic, and today we dive deep into one of the greatest literary mysteries of all time, the secret of Shakespeare's identity. Let's begin. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in the small English town of Stratford-upon-Avon. His father was a glovemaker, his mother came from a local farming family, and there's no record that young William received a university education. By the early 1590s, he was living in London, writing plays and acting. Over the next 2 decades, he would become the most successful and acclaimed playwright in England. But here's where things start to get strange. Despite his fame, very little is known about Shakespeare's personal life. There are no manuscripts in his own hand, no diaries, no letters discussing writing or the creative process. In fact, aside from a few legal documents and his will, which notably does not mention a single book, Shakespeare leaves behind a puzzling silence. This silence sparked what would become a centuries-long debate. Could a man of such modest background, with no record of travel, noble education or aristocratic connections, have penned works filled with such deep knowledge of law, politics, foreign languages, classical literature, and royal court life? By the 19th century, the so-called Shakespeare authorship question had taken hold. People began to wonder, but what if someone else wrote the plays? Over time, several candidates emerged. Let's explore some of the most popular and controversial theories. First, there's Francis Bacon. A philosopher, scientist, and court insider, Bacon was a master of language and rhetoric. Some believe he encoded hidden messages in the texts, secretly claiming authorship. Bacon's supporters argue that he had both the intellect and the access to knowledge that Shakespeare lacked. Then there's Christopher Marlowe, a brilliant playwright and poet who died, or supposedly died, in 1593, just as Shakespeare's star began to rise. Some theorists suggest Marlowe faked his death and continued writing under the name Shakespeare to avoid political persecution. Another compelling candidate is Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. A nobleman and courtier with an extensive education and travel experience, de Vere had the background many believe fits the works more than the man from Stratford. The Oxfordian theory gained traction in the 20th century and still has passionate defenders today. And then, of course, there's William Shakespeare himself. Mainstream scholars, known as Stratfordians, firmly believe that Shakespeare wrote his own works. They point to references by his contemporaries, records of his career as a playwright, and the fact that his name appears on published editions during his lifetime. But the skeptics, the so-called anti-Stratfordians, aren't convinced. They argue that the lack of personal evidence is just too glaring to ignore. How could such a genius leave behind no trace of his intellect outside of the plays themselves? Some even suggest that the name William Shakespeare was a pseudonym, possibly borrowed from the real actor from Stratford, who served as a convenient frontman while the true author remained hidden behind the scenes. And here's where things become even more fascinating. Hidden codes, cryptographic puzzles, and supposed secret messages have been found in the plays and sonnets. In the 1800s, some claimed that if you rearranged certain passages, they revealed Bacon's name or allusions to Oxford. Even 20th century scholars used computers to analyze vocabulary patterns, trying to identify the real author. But these efforts remain controversial and inconclusive. So what does the evidence really say? Historians have uncovered several documents connecting Shakespeare to the London theatre world. He was an actor, a shareholder in the Globe Theatre, and he was paid for writing plays. Prominent figures of the time, like Ben Jonson, directly referred to him as the author. Supporters argue that genius can come from anywhere, and that perhaps we underestimate what a brilliant mind like Shakespeare's could absorb, even without formal education. And yet, the mystery lingers. There's something, undeniably seductive about the idea that the plays were penned by a secret genius hiding behind the curtain of history. The elegance of the works, their deep insight into human psychology, their intimate knowledge of courtly life, all of these really seem to suggest a writer with extraordinary experience. Could that really have been a small-town boy from Stratford? Or are we perhaps looking at one of the greatest literary hoaxes in history? In 2016, on the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, 70 renowned scholars signed a declaration defending his authorship. But, the debate still rages on. In books, documentaries, academic journals, and even those late-night internet forums. Maybe the truth is lost to time. Maybe Shakespeare is not just a man, but a symbol, representing, the power of storytelling itself. In the end, whether written by a glovemaker's son, a noble earl, or, a secret poet in exile, the plays endure. They continue to be read, performed, and studied across the world centuries after they were written. And that may be the greatest mystery of all, not who wrote them, but honestly how they continue to speak to the human soul generation after generation. Was Shakespeare a genius in disguise, or is his greatest work the mystery of his own identity? You decide.